and blow. Welcome to the Chamber's Government Affairs Committee's sponsored Coffee and Conversation. We're glad that you're here. We try to bring topics that are important for our community, and this morning we certainly have one. Before we move on, I just want to mention a couple of events that we have coming up. On February the 2nd, we have a job fair. We are partnering with the South Padre Island Convention and Visitors Bureau and Texas Workforce. So if you are looking, and the city, if you are looking for employees, staff, let us know. We will have a table set up for you. We've been doing a lot of marketing for it. The TWC is doing a lot of marketing, so we're hoping to get a good turnout of talented people that are looking for employment on the island or in the area. So make sure you put that on your calendar. The second thing is on February 10th at 5:30 in the evening, we are partnering again with the Convention and Visitors Bureau, and we're having our members showcase. We did one, I believe it was last April. We had 70 members participate, and we're looking for even more to participate this time. This is a great opportunity to come and let the community and our visitors know about your business and what you do. We'll have a great time, lots of good networking with other businesses, and then meeting, as I said, our community and our visitors. So those are two things. We hope all of you will participate. In case you don't know, our offices have moved. We are no longer in our old office that we spent, I believe, well over 20 years in. We are now a little bit further south at the South Padre Island Multimodal Center, the big, beautiful blue building that's in the center of the medians just south of when you cross the causeway. So we hope that we'd love for you to come and visit us. Actually, on January 26th, we are going to have our very own ribbon cutting and mixer at our new location. We'll have beverages and food and live music, and so we want to invite everyone to please come and see our new place, visit with us, and have a lovely evening. So please come on the 26th at 5:30, and the address is 321 Padre Boulevard. So enough with that. I would like to introduce Gail Hood. Gail Hood is a longtime chamber member, real estate professional here on the island, and Gail is also sits on the Economic Development Corporation Board of Directors. And Gail has brought something to the community that we are all very excited for, and we're very thankful for her for having this forward thinking. And so she's going to introduce our speaker for today, so I'm going to turn it over to Gail.
Thank you, Alita. Well, as you know, we've been working on this Deepwater Marina, and we have a committee that consists of myself and Karla Scimeca, Daniel Bryant, Christina Boberka, and Richard Frankie and Joe Vega. And our contact with the company that we chose, Edgewater Resources, is Greg Weykemp right here. We have been really impressed with their knowledge, their experience, and we feel we made the right choice, and that he can complete it all the way from the feasibility study, all the way to completion of the project. Anyway, Greg Weykemp has over 28 years of experience in planning and design of marinas and revitalized waterfronts, including hundreds of marinas and waterfront projects across the Great Lakes and around the world. As president and co-founder of Edgewater Resources, a consultancy specializing in the planning, design, feasibility, financing, permitting, engineering, and operations of marinas around the world, he has helped many clients see their projects through to a reality. I can send you a copy of the latest update that we viewed at the EDC meeting. I can also send you a copy of his resume if you like. So if you would just give me your email address, I'll be glad to share that with you. And Greg's going to give us information on the feasibility report that he has for us now and offer suggestions for the next steps for this project. So please welcome Greg Weykemp.
How's everybody doing? All right, well, normally I have a big picture behind me, so we'll do a little theater of the mind, and I'm going to walk around and show you some pictures as we get into this so you can see what we're talking about. But, so, as Kevin, you know, this is what I do. I'm a boater. I've been a boater my whole life. I get to design marinas and waterfronts for a living, which beats working all to death. It's a lot of fun. A project like this is really something. When you think about a marina, a lot of times we think about it as sort of like a standalone business, right? It's this thing that somebody builds and then boats come to it. A project like this is really something that's more like a community park, more like a community asset. It has a marina component, but as you'll see, if there was an easy spot to build a marina here, there would already be a marina there. And so we don't have any of those easy spots. So as we look at this project, we've gone through and said, what would drive getting a marina here? Why would we build a marina? And what does it have to offer the community in addition to boaters? And that's really, really important. So I'm actually a landscape architect. I come to this from a sort of a community planning, a design, and environmental background. And then just married that up with loving to be out on the boats. And then I've got partners who are coastal engineers, civil engineers, marine engineers. And of course the engineers always have a hard time realizing they work for a landscape architect. That's they're like, wait, we have to actually we have one project in our history that does not have a lot of curves in it. If you ever make an engineer put a curve into a project, they kind of lose their mind. So the process for doing something like this, am I picking on it? There's got to be at least one engineer who just is cringing inside right now. So the engineers will argue that it's technically not a curve. There's a lot of small facets. Okay, it looks like a curve. So when we do a project like this, we start out with the obvious things. We go out and we do physical feasibility analysis, right? We don't want to try to jam a square peg into a round hole. So we look all up and down the island. And obvious things is we want to have a marina location that is close to the Gulf and has access to the Laguna Madre. And so we generally tend to, that pushes us to the south, of course. We looked at water levels, depths, currents, all those sorts of things, seagrass, mangroves, and all that. And we ended up looking south of the causeway. That makes a lot of sense for a bunch of reasons. And we'll go into them a little bit more. Then we step back, and the obvious things from a business perspective, if we build this thing, is somebody going to show up and write us a check to kind of, use the facility? So we did a marina market analysis that looked at all the facilities in South Padre and Port Isabel, went up to Corpus Christi, Port Aransas, and looked at those facilities. And you've got the nicer facilities, things like the Sea Ranch with the a traditional marina, and then you've got a lot of smaller stuff in Port Isabel and some other places that are either condo facilities or smaller facilities, and you don't have a whole lot of access for deep water boats, of course, with that. And so that market is actually pretty strong. We'll show you some economic information by your congressional districts towards the end that shows how much boating is out there and what the economic impacts are. But suffice to say that the market is strong, it's growing, and with COVID, boating has never been stronger. It has been going through the roof the last couple of years. If you've been trying to buy a boat, a motor, parts in the last year and a half, it's a nightmare. So we then went out and prepared some concepts, did small terms analysis, and we'll show you some of those. And then we come back and you start to run the numbers and how do you figure this thing out and build that. So things like on the physical feasibility that matter a lot is the wave climate, the wave protection. But the whole idea of coastal resilience is something that's really important here on the islands as well. So as we dive in here a little bit, the South Padre market, again, as I mentioned, is strong. It's actually, because there's so little capacity, we often find that the actual demand is a little suppressed. Because if you can't get a slip for 3, 4, 5 years, I'm going to find something else to do with my time and money. I might throw my name on a waiting list, but I don't have a boat. I'm not going to buy a boat. When they call me and say, I got a slip for you next summer, then I'll go get a boat. And so you might not even be thinking about it. And we find this to be the case. If you look at the Chicago market, for example, Chicago has 9 million people in the region. It has 6,000 slips physically in the city limits. And it supports about another 15,000 slips up and down the Great Lakes, around Lake Michigan. So about 25,000 slips for about 9 million people. In New York Harbor, you got 20 million people and about 1,300 slips. And so, and the average income is about 25% higher in New York Harbor. There's actually plenty of pent-up demand in a market like that, but people don't even think about it because where am I going to put my boat? So there, something like a boat club goes crazy. People will pay $8,000–$10,000 a year to be a member of a boat club, to give them the right to go out and rent a boat for $500 a shot to go out and do it because of that market. So I think there's a little bit of that happens here when you look at the fact that you got about 10,000 boats in this congressional district. There's 25,000 boats in the next district north up in Corpus Christi and Port Aransas. Not because there's so many more people, there's just more capacity. I think we've got room for that market to grow here, for example. So that's a big deal. You're getting good rates. I'm going to jump through this presentation here a little bit. So right now, all of your higher quality facilities down here are full, waiting lists. The racks are mostly full. You got some issues with the rack in terms of, do I have the right size rack for the right size boats? And that's one of the things that happens in marinas. A lot of marinas have been designed and built in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. And boats since then have typically gotten wider and fatter, and the electrical demand has gone off out of the charts. Center consoles with 400 horse outboards. If you go to the Florida market, for example, we have an office in Pompano Beach, Florida, in Fort Lauderdale. We just designed and just opened probably the most expensive dry rack facility that will ever be built. $95,000 per slip. Per dry rack facility. It's 110 feet tall, Cat 5 hurricane rated. I think I don't remember exactly how many boats it holds. But it's fully automated, so it's basically like a vending machine for boats. You show up, you hit the button, and your boat comes out and gets set down. And it's pretty darn cool. That works in Fort Lauderdale. That level of investment here in South Padre doesn't make sense yet, but you can bring many of those technologies here and figure out how to build a rack there. But they're designed around the boats that are existing now. And so, 5 years ago, you probably didn't see, you started to see the center consoles, the Intrepids, and those coming in. Right now, that's what everybody wants. It's a smaller boat. Those outboards, you can get I think we're up over 660 horsepower now for an outboard. And people put 4 or 5 of those in the back. It's kind of cool. If you're into that sort of thing. I'm a sailor, which is a whole different thing. But anyway, all that's out there. So designing a new facility has to be responsive to the market. And one of the things that we're designing into marinas now is flexibility. We want to make 100% sure. It's hard when you do a market analysis, particularly in a growth market, and I believe this is to say, well, again, this whole build it and they'll come, that's a hope and a dream. I don't do that. We try to focus on what do we know for sure, and then creating flexibility to adapt to whoever comes our way. And then we build in phases, and over time we adapt the future phases based on the reality that evolves. So one of the things that you'll see in the marina design is, instead of some of the traditional slips where you're used to seeing that, that's where our 30s are, and our 40s are here, and our 50s are over there, and the 60s are over there. We talk about something called flexible broadside, which might be 1,000 linear feet long dock, and that anybody who can show up can find a hole, and it's like parallel parking on the street. You can grab any space available. That's kind of cool for a couple of reasons. One, I don't care how big your boat is, you can fit. I don't care if you and your friends show up and one guy's in a 60 and one guy's in a 40 and one guy's in a 30. Well, the whole point of cruising together is to hang out with your friends. In a traditional marina, if you're up in Corpus, well, you're over there on C dock and you're way over there on A dock, and you guys can go meet at the restaurant. And that kind of takes the fun out of it. The nice thing about flexible broadside is anybody can sit next to anybody else. It's super efficient. And if you use that as a phasing strategy, you can track who's coming over time, and as you build out other parts of your infrastructure, you can say, yeah, we made that space, and all of a sudden the market for 45-footers grew because we had capacity for 45s where never before we had it. So those are some things that we think about from a market perspective. So when we work with the EDC, we sort of set up some guiding ideas about what did we want to achieve with this marina, what would it do? And one of the biggest points, of course, was enhancing your tourism. We wanted to see more huge tourism economy. We want to build on that. We want to create a waterfront gateway to the community. And that idea is important, that if people are going to arrive to South Padre on a boat, this should be their first experience, and it should be a very good experience. It should be memorable. It should be something that you feel like, actually, the place is amazing. And when they talk to their friends, hey, when you go through South Padre, you got to stop there. If you're going by, that's where you're going. And because it's a beautiful facility, because it has these amenities, it needs to be visible as a gateway element. Driving over the causeway to see something like that, you want to see this sort of gateway that way. But I want to flip it on its head. When you think about something like this, a lot of folks in the community might be we're going to make all this investment and it's just for a bunch of rich boaters from out of town. I want you to flip it on its head. It's also a gateway to the water for the community members. So when I show you the design that we've come up with, one of the things that in a community like this of about 2,500 people, I would guess that less than 250 to 300 of those people are on the water regularly. It's always around 10% and it's always surprising. And that to me is a shame because you live in a place like this, that's kind of the whole point. You might be at the shore. I'm going to create an opportunity for anybody here. If you can afford $10 an hour to rent a paddleboard, this is your way to get out of the water, and that should get everyone out there. That's really important because a project like this needs broad community support and it needs to do more than just be a marina. So we've really focused on creating access for the community that way. And then of course, so at the same time we're going to support 150 big boats for the big tournaments so that they can come in. And then when those folks aren't there, you've got everybody else, using the facility and the community using this place to get out on the water through rentals, boat clubs, all those sorts of things. Environmental impact is a big deal. As I said, there aren't any easy places to drop in a marina that don't have environmental impact, so we've talked about how do we minimize those. The site that we're focused on, we look at 2 sites primarily. One is between the causeway and Pier 19. When you come over the causeway and you look off to your right, you see all those mangroves and the seagrasses. Well, I'll tell you right now, I'm not going to wipe all those out. We're actually out in front of those things. I'll show you, I'm going to walk around with the drawings in a minute, but we're actually out in front of those things. We're also looking at an expansion site off of Sea Ranch, so pushing Sea Ranch further to the west. There's ways to do that minimize the impacts on the seagrass that's there, and then we also want to turn it on its head, and the facilities we build actually create new habitat and do a bunch of other things in terms of hurricane protection, flood mitigation, shoreline resilience, directing the sediments so that we build a facility that's essentially self-dredging. We have the ability now to design and computer model the way the currents move through an area and use structures to direct the currents to put sediments where we want it and direct sediments away from where we don't want it. And it's pretty darn cool because it's passive as opposed to going out there with big giant barges and diesel dredging, all the noise and all that stuff. We're going to naturally push those currents in other places, and when we're moving that sediment, we can start to say, from a broader strategic standpoint for shoreline resilience, and we need to protect the inside of the island, where do we want that sediment to go? Where do we want it to accumulate to create more protection? So this is a strategy that we're evolving and looking at here. Yep. Yeah, I'm going to do this in just a second here. So I'm going to just show this. So just so I don't know if you can see this. This is that first site. I'm going to show it to the camera here real quick. Can you see it? So we're going to talk about this causeway site. And as you can see, what you've got is a lot of mangroves. That's the dark area, and then seagrass that's out there. So you're all familiar with that. Oh, I just moved to see, because don't you love laptops? You touch anywhere on it, it's magically jumping in. Don't worry, I'm a professional presenter. It will all be fine. So we'll talk about that first site there. So I'm going to just do a quick walk around. And so what we want to look at is, one thing I want you to notice is that you want to, and this also causes mitigation issues and everything else, but we want to be real thoughtful about the way that works. And that gives us an opportunity to take advantage of that channel cut. So what we have, we looked at a bunch of different options, and I'm going to, rather than kind of going through all those, just suffice to say we explored a bunch of options to get to the idea of, when you think about what you've done well so far in terms of, like with the birding center, how you tiptoe out with boardwalks, fixed boardwalks that get out over those things. There's ways for us to create access out to the water that minimizes that impact. So we wanted to do that. Oh, by the way, if you want to see what the world's most expensive dry rack facility looks like when you're in Fort Lauderdale, it's a beautiful piece of architecture, green walls, solar, Cat 5 hurricane ratings, everything else is all electric, so it's quiet, no beeping diesel forklifts bounding around. It's pretty darn cool. So this is called F3 Marina, Fort Lauderdale, and it was designed specifically to minimize shading on the neighbors and everything else. And this is the kind of stuff that we do now. When we design buildings and structures, everything has to be all about the environment, the neighbors, and all that stuff, and it's just a smart way to go. I'm one of those hippie, green, EV driving, solar roof having type people. So generally, what I like about it, I'm also pretty fiscally conservative, and I look at all this stuff and I go, I spent all that money on the solar panels, and I'm going to get 2.5 times the money out of it that I put into it. right? So that's kind of a crazy thing from a sort of everything we do and everything we try to build at our company is really focused on long-term environmental sustainability because it makes a ton of financial sense as a business owner. It makes both sides of that equation work well. So I'm going to jump ahead to give you kind of a quick view of the marina that we proposed, and then I'm going to come back and show you some details on parts and pieces here. So, give me 1 second to get here. There we go. So, what we propose to do, remember that little cut, that channel? What we propose to do is to create a long linear marina that moves outside of the seagrass. So, can you see that okay? You got it there? So the idea is it starts with a fixed boardwalk that basically, if you drive down there now, right across from your offices, down that way, there's that little platform at the base there off the road. If you kind of go that point, the idea is to create some parking along the edge, and then a long fixed pier that brings people out past all the seagrass. And so that fixed pier, that long skinny fixed pier, yeah, it's long, and that's what golf carts are for, and e-scooters and all that sort of thing, but you're kind of basically on a boardwalk through a nature area, right? So you get out there, and that would be open to the public as sort of a public park. So everybody would be able to go out there, walk on that, go out and see what's happening, go out and view the boats, view the spray water out there. What's important is anything we build out in this facility has to have a shoreline protection system, which is breakwaters. Now, you're all used to seeing breakwaters like the one up in Corpus. It's basically a big, giant concrete wall. Well, those work. We call that the brute force approach. And what that does is it tends to, it basically tends to reflect a lot of wave energy. It works, but it's not pretty. It doesn't create any habitat. It doesn't create any secondary advantages. What we wanted to do was look at this idea of, again, it's quite long, a long, flexible broadside area, so that's about 2,000 feet long. And again, golf cart service, things like this. There's one of these marinas, a marina like this in Charleston, South Carolina, called the Mega Dock. And the idea is, you can fit any kinds of boats out there, but that outer breakwater set of islands is super critically important. Rather than just being a single breakwater wall that just dumps the energy back out into the bay, and it actually creates a worse wave climate, and it creates all kinds of problems with the way sedimentation works and things like that. That sort of flexible series of islands does a ton of interesting things. One, they're big, okay? So they look like little bitty islands. Some, like the biggest boat in that marina there is about 200, it's about 100 foot long there. So those islands some of them are 200, 300 feet long. They're big. And those are big enough to start creating habitat out there. So what we do is we think about the type of rock that we're building, the way, the fine detail that doesn't show up on a drawing of this scale is these little fine edges we call them fish fingers and fish alleys. And so the idea is we're really focused on creating as much habitat as possible. And if you know I'm feeling about Daniel Bryant's and their big groups, the reef offshore, think of this as the equivalent reef on the inshore, right? And so the idea is this becomes something like South Padre's aquatic habitat park. And you'd be out there, out on that point at the end, looking at all of that. Then you'd run a kayak or paddleboard and go paddle out there, or you'd run a shallow boat and go out and fish in there. All of those sorts of things. We met with the environmental agency folks, and they're focused on oysters, and I guess we got a manatee rolling around them. That's all great. I love that stuff, because what I want you to see that is this is something is the way it finances is something like this. This is a big expensive project. It's about $40 million for this whole thing. Probably half of that is in the breakwater, and half of that roughly is in the marina. The marina, when we run all the numbers, can stand on its own 2 feet, but it can't afford to pay for that breakwater. The community would get support to build that breakwater through things like federal grants, because it does get windy here. You have had a hurricane or two. Were you anybody around in the 80s when the marina over in Port Isabel got completely wiped out 2 years after it was built? That was a bad day. That might actually help us when we talk to FEMA. So if I would show you some other projects, we've built a project just like this over in Fort Pierce, Florida. Did exactly the same thing, a series of segmented breakwaters. offshore, very intentionally designed to direct the currents and move the sedimentation away. There's a marina there that FEMA paid to rebuild twice. FEMA said, you know what? We're not building this thing a third time. So instead of spending the money to rebuild your marina, they gave them money to build this offshore breakwater, about $19 million, 100% funded by FEMA, something like this. 100% funded by FEMA because they don't have to ever pay to rebuild that marina again. That makes sense. And those are the kinds of things that are happening right now. FEMA, just in September, created something called Building Resilience in Communities, $1.16 billion for projects like this. They want to build projects that prevent damage, not come in after the fact and clean up the mess. So when you think about a project like that, you've got FEMA money that's out there, you've got state money, you've got National Fish and Wildlife money, a lot of different grant sources out there to build a project like this that creates the opportunity for the private sector to come in and build a marina. Now, maybe the city or county could build a marina too. That's another way that gets done. But a project like this gets done through a public-private partnership. And the way we build that support is thinking about those grant partners, building these. It's complicated for sure, but you build these partnerships. You get the offshore breakwaters built. You get this sort of city park, this aquatic nature park out there. Thinking about all those benefits, building a really broad base of support for these activities. And that allows a private person to come in and get that marina up and running, which then cycles back into building all the other things. So that's a big deal. We think that's going to make a lot of sense, and it is how big, complicated projects are getting built these days. So this project, when it's done, creates a marina. It's going to create the opportunity to support those big fishing tournaments. It's also going to create more capacity for local seasonal boats, bigger seasonal boats. When we design it, when we dredge and build, do that work, it's got some impacts environmentally, but the net environmental benefits will outweigh any of those impacts as we go through that. And then ultimately you get more community benefits, and then you start to think about the economic benefits. So if I zoom out to this stuff, I'm going to actually, before I do all that, we actually looked at a second site, which uses the exact same concept, but it's a sea ranch expansion, so I'm just going to show you this as well. So everything I just told you about the environmental approach and the docking approach applies here, but it's in a different configuration because it's basically expanding sea ranch to the west. So I'm going to do all that and just kind of walk around this. So all the things I told you about those breakwaters are there. This one also includes another dry rack facility, more of a modern dry rack. So this is a more expensive project overall, but it also generates more revenue because it supports several hundred more boats. So that's another option there.
Do those barrier islands count as mitigation assets? Can you plant mangroves on them and seagrasses and things like that?
We would definitely be planting that. I think when we met with the folks in the environmental, they would look at that as, it's always interesting because they view any fill in the water as an impact. So even though we're creating new habitat, it would be sort of offsetting itself. So I don't know that they would give us credit for mitigating other things. But what we want to get to is, let us build this, because this is a better way to build a project like this in the first place. From the regulatory standpoint, their first answer is, you don't need another marina.
Yeah.
I'm like, you know that. But what we want to get to is, if we're going to go to the trouble of building a marina, I want to make sure that, first thing we do is engage more in the community. We engage more in the environmental groups to say, this is a concept, but what we have to do is really get into the detail and say, what specific species do we want to target? How does this thing specifically help the turtles, for example, or the oysters, or what specific birds? We would dive in great detail and push on it. We've talked to David Hicks over at UTRGV. How do we dive in great detail? This is very high level. When you do a feasibility study like this, and I think we'll have this available if you want to see this presentation, Gil will be able to get this to you. So, but when we get into something like this, we want to dive in. The feasibility is sort of like an onion. This first layer is, okay, let's look at the market, basic feasibility, high level, is there a path? And I think the answer is, yeah, absolutely, there's a path forward here. That's the first layer. So then that next layer you dive into some preliminary engineering. I've made a lot of assumptions about costs, and of course I try to make all the costs as high as I can that makes sense, and I make the revenues. I don't want to pad things and be artificial about it, because I want this thing to get done and be built. So a lot of people in my profession, they love drawing pictures of things that nobody will ever build because there's no liability there. It was great, you'll love it, it's going to be fabulous. And then when you show them something that's got really, really expensive and it's crazy, And they're like, but you're just not being visionary. You just have to be visionary. It'll be great. And what we wanted to do here is come up with basically a visionary plan that has some economic underpinnings to it, and with a grant strategy and a financing strategy that makes sense. If it's got a financing strategy associated with it, you can call it visionary. If it doesn't, it's called imaginary. And there's a big distinction there. So when we think about the economic impacts, there's a thing called the AMI, Marina Economic Impact Calculator. It's put together by folks at the College of William and Mary and the University of Florida. And they basically built a model that says, you tell me the revenues and I'll tell you the economic impacts. The low end of the economic impacts here are something on the order of about 27 jobs. There it is. It's 27 jobs, about $1.5 million in local labor income. That's pretty good. A lot of that income is rollover income into the local restaurants, the shops, the services, all those sorts of things. It's not 27 people working in the marina. That includes direct, indirect, secondary impacts. Hundreds of thousands of dollars in tax revenues. That's a big deal. If we did the Sea Ranch side, it's actually about double the amount because it's just more boats, more activity over there. And one of the questions is can you do both? And I think certainly this market over time, you wouldn't dump all that capacity on the market at once. In fact, even any one of these we would build in phases. So I would start with that first long fixed pier, start there. Get that moving, maybe one leg of the floating pier for the transients, and then over time you can extend that out and you can build portions of the breakwater and phase that in over time, improve that out. So I promise you some economic impact numbers. The basic numbers, I can promise you right here, but this is from the National Marine Manufacturers Association. It's the national trade group that tracks all these things. So the impact on recreational boating in Texas's economy is about $7.7 billion annually, about almost 26,000 jobs, and 1,775 businesses, and about 563,000 boats in the state of Texas. That's a bunch of boats. In the 34th Congressional District, where we are, it's much smaller. It's about $145 million, 630 jobs, and only about 10,600 boats down here so far. But if I go one district north, that number is much, much higher, about 2.5 times, 26,000 boats, $235 million in revenue. I would argue that there's a lot of folks with boats up there that would rather have their boats down here. Not that I want to go steal their boats, but by building capacity, we'll actually get more people who will come here. So yeah, some of those boats may come down here, but there's also folks here when they finally have an opportunity and there's enough capacity that I can get to, you'll see that grow. So there's definitely a lot of room to grow in the state, but also in this local region. So huge impacts there, and a lot of opportunity to build on that. When you think about boat sales, really broadly macro for the business nationally, there's a report out just a week ago that shows that boat sales set record highs in 2020. We expect this year boat sales will be 7% over the 5-year average, which includes these last 2 crazy years, so boat sales are still going wild. When you think about the vast majority, there's the U.S. Department of Commerce estimates that outdoor recreation is about $689 billion. Boating and fishing is the #1 contributor to that. So this is more than RVs, more than all that other stuff. This is the biggest piece of outdoor recreation, and it's just going hog wild right now. So a lot of capacity there, a lot of opportunities there. So where we are right now is at a high level of feasibility. It's a complicated project. It's going to require a public-private partnership. It's going to require the public side to help us figure out how to build basically a safe harbor to build the marina. And by building that safe harbor, it's going to create habitat, shoreline protection, flood mitigation, hurricane protection, all those sorts of things. And it's going to support tourism in terms of fishing and the way that the offshore reef is going to. This is the inshore reef. If it's too nasty to fish out there, you come over here. If you got all the folks in the community who can't afford to get out and own a boat, this is a place they'll be able to rent a kayak for $10 an hour and get out there and get on the water finally. A lot of good reasons to do that. Plus, as a visual impact as you come up the causeway, and it's this sort of gateway. It's a waterfront gateway to community. And as a boater, I visit. Has anybody ever driven into Chicago? It is not a pleasant experience from any direction you drive into Chicago. About 3 times a year, I sail my boat from St. John. I'm on the east side of Lake Michigan. I sail my boat into Chicago, and I got to tell you, Sailing into Chicago is a fantastic experience. You see those lights come up from about 4 hours before you get there, and I usually sail in at night, and it is just an incredible experience to arrive in a city by boat. If you haven't done that, it's certainly, you gotta find a way to do that, and I wanna make it, when you come into South Padre, you come in, that's a cool experience. It's such a better way to arrive in a city than a plane or a car or a train. All of that matters. So we build that partnership to push on the government side to help us get that funding, get that grant funding, and build that partnership to build there, and then go out and work on local investors. And we've talked to local folks, and we've got some local folks who are in the business that have expressed some interest in helping us build the marina side of it. The city could build that as well. City, anybody else. We have a huge project in my hometown called Harbor Shores. Anybody here a golf fan? Maybe watch the Senior PGA Championship golf? Anybody? All right. Every other year, the Senior PGA Championship is in my hometown. It's at the Harbor Shores Golf Club in Benton Harbor. It's right across the river. It's about maybe a half mile from my office. That whole entire project was a project of the local Economic Development Corporation working with Whirlpool, who happens to have their world headquarters there. Whirlpool decided to, it's funny, a Fortune 500 company is in a town of 8,000 people that is known in the state for its poverty. It's kind of nutty. And they were contemplating moving out of town to Chicago, where all the big boy Fortune 500 firms were. They decided instead to stay there and spend all the money that would have cost them to move their headquarters and dump it into the community and say, we're going to make the community what they want. It's hard to recruit people to move to Southwest Michigan. Not that it's not beautiful, it's just small, right? So as part of that, we built this project and built all of this up, and through a local EDC, figured out how do you go out and acquire 567 parcels? How do you go out and then clean up 567, almost all of them former industrial brownfield sites they pulled out enough trash out of one wetland area to fill a football field 70 feet deep with trash. Incredible. Literally turn over the shovel, glowing green radioactive stuff from the site. There's a building that built bomb sites for World War II bombers, the glowing green stuff. Incredible contamination. Cleaned that all up, created a ton of jobs using tax increment financing. When we built the project there, we built the hotel there and a marina there. When I say that, I was actually one of the owners and investors in the project. We physically built it. All the tax revenue there goes to that community, even though it's in the adjacent community through a titling act. So there's a lot of ways to leverage this type of investment to build economic growth in the community, to support folks who need it badly, create jobs, and this all works. So these are complicated things. That's our next step in this process, is to build that partnership and find a lead agency and say, we're going to take the charge on getting that done and pushing this forward. When you push past that, and there's a lot of engagement with the community, of course, and then thinking about how do you operate it, a lot of engineering, a lot of steps to go forward, but that's where we're at today. So, are there any questions? Might be one or two. So.
Yes. My question is your company has looked at any way, like I come from Israel,
So everybody can hear you.
and I see in Tel Aviv they were able in the Mediterranean to erect marinas along the actual Mediterranean.
Mm-hmm.
Have you all looked at an opportunity in the Gulf itself?
To go out
Create a water break of some sort, so it can.
So we've actually built the marina. I'm going to show you one here. So the idea is if you build what we call an offshore marina. So there's kind of this project is actually in a way like an offshore marina. We also often build marinas by excavating a harbor out from the land. You don't have a ton of land to do that, but we designed this marina here in Chicago. It's called 31st Street Harbor. If I can make this look my boat. So this marina has won an award called the Fabian Cousteau Blue Award for the most sustainable harbor in the world, which is really proud of that. That breakwater you see there is over half a mile long. It was $35 million to build that breakwater back in 2010. It's designed, so Lake Michigan, yes, it's a lake. This wall had to be designed so this in 35-foot waves. We get some waves on there. We also get what are called shorter, steeper waves. And so whenever the ocean boats come to Lake Michigan, they always call that little puddle we're going to go sailboat race in. It usually breaks their boat because we just had the offshore power boaters, the huge go fast that you see out in the oceans. they're designed for long swells, not short steep waves like we get here. So we tend to beat the snot out of ourselves with these things. So we didn't look at putting one of those offshore here because that is a much more expensive way to build a facility because you have to deal with it. That's deeper water. And one of the advantages we have on these sites in here is the deep water site, and deep is in quotes, at Sea Ranch is 8 or 10 feet. That breakwater is built in 20 feet of water. And when you build those things, those are trapezoids. And there's a reason that we weren't doing the segmented breakwaters here. We're actually building a segmented breakwater structure offshore up at Illinois Beach State Park with the specific intent to capture the sediment, the sand that moves down, and actually putting it back on the beach because it's the only remaining natural dune in the state of Illinois. And because of all the built-up areas around it, it starved it from that sand, and so they've lost almost 500 feet inland. So we're using that strategy to put the beach back together. But putting it offshore here, it complicates it. It would make it much more expensive than doing it on the inside. So, one of the things that there's a team in Israel that is advancing technology, something called e-concrete. So huge innovation from Israel, where when you build things out of concrete, there's two problems with concrete. One, it represents about 8% of our global carbon emissions, which is a big, big deal. We need to minimize that, and that comes from the energy involved in the heat and so on. But the chemistry of concrete, oftentimes, it's the pH basically, makes it difficult for plant life and aquatic life to grow on it. The e-concrete is specifically designed with textures and a chemistry that allows the appropriate kind of, it basically becomes a reef structure, that the right kind of growth. And obviously stuff grows on everything, but not the right kind of stuff. So that's one of the things that we've gotten from the folks in Israel, which is really exciting. So, any other questions?
Did you cite overall economic impact estimate for the island when this was built?
Yeah, and that will be, so where we're at with our study is, these are the conclusions. I'm actually going to write up the full report. That'll get to Gail here in the next month, and I'll have that in there. So what we did is we used the AMI Marina Economic Impact Calculator, put together by William and Mary in the University of Florida, and that's what we had that number. So we'll include that in the report.
What is that number?
The number for the causeway site. Let me get that quickly. Is so. So what you get here is a summary of about 29 total jobs, about $5 million in industry output, about 2.9 million in value-added GDP, and about 1.45 million in local labor income. And that's the small one. If we go to the Sea Ranch one, which has the rack, it's roughly double that. And again, that covers not just the jobs in the marina, it covers when those folks show up, they go out and they buy gas. So when you see one of those 65, 75, 85 foot fishing boats come in, I want you to visualize $100 bills flying off the back. Because that's what happens. That is exactly what happens. When you think about a boat, so I'm really proud of that marina in Chicago, you can probably tell. It's $103 million, probably the biggest single infrastructure project I'll build in my career. That's a big one. We have a super yacht maintenance refit overhaul operation in San Juan, Puerto Rico that's coming online. The first boat we serviced there, one boat, $330 million. Okay, that's a big deal. So one boat over 3 times the cost of the biggest infrastructure project I've ever built. If you own a boat, one of the things you learn rapidly is it's a constant money drain. You spend, on average, about 10% of the cost of the boat every year maintaining the boat. That's not fuel. And all the boat owners are like, okay. My greatest fear is that I will die and my wife will sell our boat for what I told her it's worth. She knows. So about 10% of the cost. That, again, that's not fuel, that's not food, that's just bottom paint. Why is it that everything on a boat breaks all the time? I have a sailboat, and we race the sailboat, and it's kind of funny. We got a guy on our boat named Jimmy. Everybody on the boat is replaceable except Jimmy, because Jimmy can fix anything on the boat at any time. If the boat breaks, I will call Jimmy after we break something, and I'll get on the phone, and before I did, what did you do? I'm like, I didn't. He's like, I can tell. What did you do? So you think about that. So my boat, it's a 40 foot. It's a nice big boat. I love my boat. And my bottom job every year is about $800 in paint and a lot of labor. And fortunately, I have teenagers, so we scrub and we do it. $800. That's great. I'm not going to not do it. I have to do that every single year, whether I want to or not. A super yacht has a bottom job that costs $2 to $3 million. And they do that every year because they have to. Because when your boat is $300 million, you're not going to let that investment go away. You're not going to scrimp on the bottom job, right? So when you think about that income, that applies to boats up and down the scale. And when that boat is home ported, about 30% or so take that. Let's say somebody brings in $100 million figure out here, and that's one probably in the 150 to 200 foot range. If somebody home ported that here, they'd be looking at spending something like $10 million a year maintaining that boat. 30% of that money typically goes to the home port and local admin impacts. Right. So we're actually designing for the government of Anguilla, a little island north of St. Martin in the Caribbean. By building a marina there, if we bring in 3 super yachts to home port there, we've doubled their entire country's GDP. So, and that's a good thing, because when you think about that, it's crazy when you think about jobs and community creation and things like that. And you're working with the 1% of the 1%. But I've never seen an opportunity where the money goes from the Jeff Bezoses of the world to the craftsman more directly, right? It's like Jeff to the ship captain to the guy who's actually doing the work, which is pretty darn cool. And you can bypass everything else. And what's cool is you can do those job creation programs and job training programs. You build a marina like this, you work with local community college. I've got a nephew, godson, he's not your traditional student. He's not the kid he's smart, but school is not his thing. He's going to go to a boat building school in a 1 or 2 year program, and this kid's set for life because people like this are out there and they need those craftsmen, and there's a huge shortage. If you're in the marine service industry right now, trying to find a service tech is a nightmare. Trying to find one that will show up sober is even harder. Those are power boaters. Sailors, we are much more responsible. But this whole idea, you think about electrical safety, the things in marinas, the marinas need to be renovated and updated. There's electric shock drowning issues. It's a little bit less of an issue in salt water, but it's still an issue because it's all in the national codes. Every boat out there that's more than 5 years old probably has an electrical fault that needs to be repaired. If your brother-in-law is an electrician who wires houses, don't let him touch your boat. It is not the same. You don't bond the neutrals in the ground. It's a different thing. And you can dump current in the water and you kill people. It's a big deal. All those boats need to be upgraded and repaired. And so when these boats are here, this is a job for somebody who can be a service tech, and it can be anybody. With willingness to learn and work and get after it. So, any other questions? Yes, sir. We'll come back to the committee.
Do these cost projections of yours include your company's design and engineering fees to the completion of the project, and do you supervise the project?
Sure. So the question is do the budget estimates include paying me to figure out how to engineer it, and can we take it all the way through? We have in all of our estimates a contingency of 25% because we're at a really high level. So yeah, that would at this scale that would include the engineering fees, and it wouldn't be just us, of course. It'd be like David Hicks, and we engage. We have offices in Wisconsin and Michigan and Florida, and we work all over the world, and we always have local partners because I'm not going to pretend to know everything. David's going to know more about the local environment than I will ever learn. He's forgotten more than I'm ever going to know. So we would partner and figure out those things. And we take projects all the way through completion. We do all the engineering, coastal engineering, and then we can help figure out how to get operators in here. We don't do a ton of operation ourselves. We actually own separate facilities, but one of the things that's important is, I don't do these feasibility studies to get a project like this, because I do far more marina feasibility studies than I ever have the ability to build myself. But yeah, we can take it all the way through there, and that is factored into the cost.
was curious, as you look at the development and economics of this, do the feasibility studies point towards building a whole new facility south of the causeway, or using, say, the existing facility at the Marina, at South Marina, and you just continuing developing that since it's already exists?
So you're talking about a sea range, right? Yeah. So we look at both sites, and both are feasible. So what we're looking at this level is, I don't want to put all of our eggs in one basket. So from an environmental perspective, it's a little bit easier to go to sea ranch because it's a little bit less impact with those things. You also have the ability to look at a rack facility there. That's a little bit easier to do than there is on the Causeway site. On the other hand, it has some disadvantages because of complexity, parking and access, and some other things because there's already a marina there. We'd be displacing the campground, for example, that's there. So there's impacts that at this level I'm not diving into. So whereas on the Causeway side, so they both have pros and cons, and we've looked at both from an economic impact standpoint, from a cost standpoint. They kind of have a similar need, somewhere between $15 and $25 million of outside grant funding to build those breakwaters, for example. So we're looking at them both, and we're pretty agnostic on which one's the way to go. It's more of a question of how do you assemble land and get all the partners in place. And I would approach, if we want to push forward, I'd approach pushing forward both of them, and you see which one wins over time based on how you put it together. Because you just never know. Sometimes, the Causeway said there's 3 different landowners in there. One of the things that when you look at what we propose, we're tiptoeing in doing as minimal impact as possible where that's privately owned. That's going to make those other properties much, much more valuable to have that asset next to it. I would hope that those folks would engage with us as partners. Sometimes people are just like, nope. And there you go. Well, fortunately, we have another option. So we want to make sure we have both options available to us. So. Any other questions?
What's the slip capacity?
What's the slip capacity?
And how big are the boats coming in, and you foresee how many sitting here versus how many being tourist boats that come watch a SpaceX launch?
Sure. So the question, if you didn't hear it, was what's the capacity of the facilities and what size boats? So the capacity, I look at it a couple of different ways. One is if I were to discount traditional slips, it would be a certain number. We designed this around to accommodate the largest tarpon fishing tournament, about 150 of the big boats, so we can take that many. There's about 6,000 to 8,000 linear feet of dock space on that flexible broadside, and so the nice thing is that allows any size boat to come in and use it. So in terms of the counts, though, if I have a 90-footer sitting there, okay, I've got one boat, but I could put 2 40s in that same space, for example. So the exact count would vary quite a bit. We estimate for our financial performance here about a 50-50 seasonal to transient slip mix. So seasonal is somebody who lives here, keeps the boat here, or whatever, they just keep the boat here all year round. A transient is a visitor from somewhere else. So we estimated about a 50-50 mix. And again, that's something that the market is going to tell us what that is, but we think that that's a reasonable way to go, and we would phase into that. And so one of the things, one of the best funding sources is the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Boating Infrastructure Grant. They fund very specifically dedicated transient slips. So their goal is to create capacity for a visitor to come from one place to another. And this kind of a market is exactly what they're after, because there are no dedicated transit slips right now in this whole entire area. There are places a transit can go, but it's not dedicated permanently to be always available as a transient that's going to serve the kind of boats that would come here, 26 feet longer. They've got these funny little criteria that they use. We've gotten, I should know the number, 17 or 18 boating infrastructure grants over the years. The current cap is about $1.5 million. So that is a grant that I would feel very comfortable in saying that that's something we can build into our performance. It's not a guarantee, but we're pretty good at getting these grants. We've gotten every one we've ever asked for. Past performance is not a guarantee of future something or other. But we've done pretty good. We've had to ask 2 or 3 times for a couple of them, but we got there. So that would be one way that would be a factor. Now, the reason I bring that up in relation to your question is if you get a boating infrastructure grant, those need to be dedicated and remain dedicated to transient only for the life of the facility. So that would guide us in how that works and matching grants and things like that. So, any other questions? How are we doing on time? Are we got right around? Okay.
Well, does anybody else regarding the questions? Thank you, Greg.
And
We
Gail's got my
appreciate
number.
it. Thank y'all for coming. Nice turnout.
Thank you.
Y'all, Greg will be here for just a few minutes. If y'all have more questions, you can come up and talk to him.